On this episode of Remington's Inside the Industry, I'm sitting down with Larry Keane, the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs and the Assistant Secretary and General Counsel at the Nssf, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Nssf is at the forefront of most legislative challenges that are thrown towards the firearms industry. This podcast is brought to you by Remington Firearms. For more information on the new era of Remington, visit our site at remarms.com. Larry, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. For the listeners, we're doing this remotely. Larry's at one location, I'm someplace else, so it may be a little different than if we were simply in the studio. So Larry Keane, I'd like to welcome you. And let's start out a little bit because I know there's a lot of people here that are listening that maybe have no idea what the Nssf is, what you do, how you do it, etc. So why don't we start there?
Sure, Ken. Well, thanks for inviting us. It's a pleasure to visit with you. So the Nssf, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, is the National Trade Association for the firearms, ammunition, hunting, and shooting sports industry. So companies like Remington Arms, for example, and basically all the other major firearms and ammunition manufacturers you ever heard of, smaller companies you may not have, distributors and retailers, everything from big box corporate retailers like Academy and Sportsman's Warehouse and Bass Pro Shop, all the way down to the single store mom and pop retailer, FFL, on the backcountry road somewhere. So pretty broad membership of over 9,000, but we are the industry trade association.
And how long have you been in existence?
The NSSF was formed in 1961 by the then leaders of the industry. So we've been around since 1961, originally founded in New Jersey because the first president was one of the editors of Outdoor Life or Field and Stream, I can't remember which, and they happened to live in New Jersey. But we've been headquartered in Connecticut since probably around 1963 or 1964. And as some may know, we have the very odd happenstance of being headquartered in Newtown, Connecticut, just a mere 3 miles from where
I've never heard of Newtown, of course.
Yeah, the terrible tragedy in Sandy Hook took place.
Yep.
So, just a freak happenstance that we happen to be there. So.
So NSSF, tell us some of the things that you do. I mean, look, I know NSSF well. I know you. I've been around the industry for a while, so I know. But some people don't know. So what kind of things does NSSF actually do?
Well, among the things we do is NSSF owns the SHOT Show, which I'm sure your audience is familiar with. And that obviously is a big full-time endeavor all year long for those 4 days in January. It's also the primary source of revenue for us. But we also, over the last 20 plus years, have been involved in government relations. So when I started at NSSF in May of 2000, right sort of at the beginning of the municipal city lawsuits against the industry, NSSF by its charter could not be involved in any political activities or anything like that. So the charter was changed in light of dealing with the challenge. And so we've grown our government relations and public affairs capabilities, and that's really the part of NSSF that I'm responsible for, as well as the sort of ordinary legal issues as the general counsel. We also do a lot of programs and activities over the years to promote participation in hunting and the shooting sports. And many programs over the years, things that we've done and then spun off. Like we started Scholastic Clay Targets program many years ago and got that stood up, and then spun that off, and now it's its own entity, but it's been very, very successful. We've done things like the Sportsman's Team Challenge, biathlon, and on and on. We do a number of programs today in those in that area of promoting participation or retention and renewing people who haven't participated in hunting or the shooting sports in years, because you get busy with life and your kids and things, and so then you just don't have as much free time as you used to. So we have programs geared towards that. We also do a lot of work to help retailers to be successful in business. Everything from how to market to how to exist, have a presence in social media, which is a challenge, and of course, importantly, a lot of time and effort working towards making sure they stay compliant with ATF. And then for the manufacturers, similarly, making sure they are compliant, but also in the areas of, TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau, with State Department, the Commerce Department, all the other alphabet soup in the government that, large companies have to deal with. So we try to touch all of those things. We spend a lot of time, in the public square, if you will, calling out the lies like we heard just last night from President Biden during the State of the Union. So it's a pretty broad portfolio of things that we do, a very broad membership base. Again, everything from the biggest companies to the little mom and pops. So it keeps us on our toes.
Well, look, if I haven't said it before, I'll say it now, but I have said it before, maybe not to your ears, but I think the NSSF is a great organization, and I think that, in many ways, without the NSSF, we would, and those of us in the firearms industry, would have far more difficulties than we actually do have. And the difficulties we have now are not insignificant to start with.
No, they're not.
So I'm very appreciative of you guys, even though you may not have heard it before.
Well, I have heard that, and I appreciate your saying that. And I think it's important for people in the industry to know who we are. And we certainly would welcome people in the industry who aren't members, joining and supporting what we do. I mean, we don't work just for our members. Our work benefits everybody in the industry. And so, I always feel that people in the industry that haven't joined are kind of getting a free ride, and that kind of irks us a little bit because, we represent the industry. We don't just represent our members. Right. We think that's important. It makes us stronger when we have more members of the
right.
industry that are members.
Well, and I think that not to really, well, it's not digressing at all, but as we know, the NRA has certainly had some challenges in the last period of time, and I think a lot of people are looking towards the NSSF and saying, thank goodness for them. So, look, I'm appreciative. You did mention something that I have to comment on, though, and that is helping retailers become profitable or be profitable. I'd be shocked if there's retailers out there the last couple of years that were not profitable.
Yeah, well,
and if they weren't, it's their own damn fault.
I would agree. It'd be pretty hard not to be successful, but over time, as we know, the good days will come to an end, and the market will soften as it always does. I mean, I've had many conversations with reporters saying, look, yes, there's a spike in sales. Its demand is exceptionally high, never higher than the past 2 years. But at some point, when the things that are driving that surge subside, COVID, crime, the politics, it'll become, people will have to work a little harder to be successful. It's certainly possible, but, making sure they understand how to market, making sure they understand inventory controls and things like that. So, but
So suggesting to them that dollar that you put in the cash register is not necessarily 100% yours.
Yeah, you got to pay the tax man for sure, right? So
You have to pay your suppliers as well.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So
No, look, I think, and it's interesting because the reality is that in our industry, there's peaks and valleys, like in so many industries, but ours, unlike a lot of industries, is driven a little bit different.
yes,
For sure, the political, elections make a huge difference. The last before COVID, certainly, the last big increase was during the Obama years, and then coming up to the election when everybody
right.
thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then overnight, sales just died for everybody because now Trump was in power, and everybody was well aware that he wasn't going to change their Second Amendment rights.
Right. You had the so-called Trump slump. But the interesting thing,
Yep.
Ken, over time, and I've now been at this for many
Longer
years.
than you care to admit.
Yeah, yeah. What I've explained to reporters who ask, the Trump slump, things sales are way down. I'm like, yes, because it was a peak. We knew it, wasn't sustainable forever, and that at some point, things would come back into equilibrium. But what you see over time, and it's reflected in the background check data, the NICS data, it said, yes, we're off the peaks, but the valley floor is higher. You see more
Correct.
checks. So the market is growing, and we've seen tremendous increase just in the past 2 years of first-time gun buyers. I think it's like about 14 million in the last 2 years alone. That's incredible. So, and what's really interesting to me about these first-time gun buyers is the demographics: women, African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics and Latinos, huge increases. So it really puts the lie to this false myth that's out there that only a bunch of middle-aged, fat, balding white guys living,
Okay, I'm not
flyover
balding,
country.
so you're not picking on me, right?
No, I'm being
Yeah,
self-effacing. We're on the phone, but I am follically challenged. So not when I started at NSSF, but for many years now. So maybe it's related. I don't know. But
Well, NSSF did and I don't know exactly. I don't know whether it was NSSF or whether it was an independent group, but I remember reading a survey or a study that was done. I don't even recall when it was, but it was who the firearms owners were, and at that time it was there's a certain percentage, and I don't recall exactly what it was, that are already firearms owners, and then there's that certain percentage that no matter what you do, they will never become firearms owner. And then there was that massive big percentage in the middle that and I'm sure you might recall this, that said that they weren't adamantly against it, and
right.
they said that they could envision themselves under the right circumstances owning a firearm. And those people are the ones that have come to the table in the last couple of years.
You're exactly right. We've done one of the things we do, I didn't mention before, we do a lot of market research, industry research that we put out for our members and for the industry, and sometimes some of it we put out publicly, and so there have been studies, and there are a certain number of people who will never buy a gun. There are people that some of the most recent things I've seen that people who own guns own like on average 5, and which always sets the anti-gun people's hair on fire. But there are people, and I'm sure you're one of them, I am, that own more than 5, many more, so. But,
I have a few more than 5. That's correct.
And that's all I'm going to tell you.
But I only use 3 of them. So that's kind of bizarre.
But you know what they say about gun safes, Ken? they shrink. So,
Yes, exactly.
but yes,
You know,
you're seeing people who have, just again during the last 2 years. It was driven by the set in of the pandemic and fear of the unknown and food insecurity and all of the things that we all remember well at the beginning of this. And then, so that drove a lot of people to buy firearms for the first time for self-protection. That's the primary motivating reason.
right.
And then we had the unrest in the summer of 20 with the aftermath of George Floyd and Black Lives Matters and the defund the police and the looting and rioting and the burning of cities, and all of that, and that drove people considerably. And then you came right into the election, and then Biden has won the election, and I'm not going to get into the whole January 6th thing, but he's the president and obviously anti-gun. He called the industry the enemy. He wants to ban the most popular rifle being sold, and many of the things he mentioned last night. He's not able to achieve legislatively any of these things that he wants, but he panders to the anti-gun base chiefly of the Democratic Party, unfortunately, and so that drove sales, and that I think will continue as we go through this year and head into the midterm elections.
I agree, Larry. I think that it's almost been the perfect storm, for those of us within the industry anyway.
Yeah.
You've had the election, you've had the fool that's there today, and then combine that with the social unrest,
Mm-hmm.
and then throw in another little part with the pandemic where a lot of people, I'm not one of them because my freezer is full of wild game, but where a lot of people would go shopping and they were seeing prices go crazy, a lot of lack of availability for a lot of meats.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a big number of people that have never hunted before that said, gee, I'd like to do this. As a matter of fact, a story that you probably haven't heard, but my cohorts here have heard, and I think has been on the podcast a few times. A friend of mine owns, Tim Fallon owns the FTW SAM shooting school.
Mm-hmm.
They do a lot of the tier 1, tier 2 training for the SEAL teams
Mm-hmm.
and the various military, but they also train hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shooters how to shoot. And because Tim is a huge hunter,
Yep.
and so basically, and he really believes in one shot, one kill.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I started talking to him. I said, Tim, you really need to do a school for the first-time hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah. And we talked about it and came up with a pretty good program. And he thought he would have one. I think, and this was just this last year it started, I think he's had 12 of them now.
Wow.
And these first-time hunters go, and they're taught how to shoot reasonably well. They're taught, about the different types of hunting that you'll do, spot and stalk.
Right.
They're taught a little bit about processing, about caping. It's really a great school. It's 4 days, 3 or 4 days, and over the course of the year, he's had 12 of them, which is pretty good for something brand new. So people are really interested in that.
Oh, we've seen through the pandemic, as you know, a very big, steep increase in hunting license sales.
Yep.
So a lot of people during the pandemic, took up hunting or renewed their interest in hunting. They haven't done it in a while. And part of that was driven by just getting outside in the fresh air, something you could do. I mean, the outdoor recreation in general saw big increases. Certainly hunting did, target shooting as well. But also part of that, particularly now with the surge in the price of meat and inflation generally, people are participating in hunting, not to put something on the wall, but to fill their freezer. So absolutely that's taking place. And that's so encouraging. I don't think I had heard that, but that's very encouraging because, hunting, if you've never done it and you don't know anybody, who does. I mean, how do you get into that, right? I mean, it's like you can go to a driving range and take lessons. You can go, you know, skiing and take lessons and a lot of other sports like that. But like hunting, how do you, if you have no idea, right? How do you get started? And we've got, programs we actually do like plus one to try to encourage people that do hunt to introduce somebody new, because mentorship is critical for getting people involved in hunting. It used to be the father takes the son or the grandfather and things like that. That's harder to do now in modern society. So that is fantastic, because people are going to try it and they're not successful. They're going to give up and move on to something else. So,
well, I thought of it because years ago, you probably don't know, but I spent the majority of my career in the ski industry,
mm-hmm.
and we did a fair amount of research at the time about how do you get new skiers, why do people try something and then not continue, etc. And one of the things that we learned from that is that people, if they had an interest in skiing, yes, you can take a lesson, but where do you go? You can take a lesson at the mountain, but if people want to know about skiing, which is generally the case, people want to know about skiing and about equipment, etc. And they felt very intimidated to go into a ski shop, because the ski shop personnel at least this is what people felt. They thought they'd look down their nose at them, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So there was a lot of people lost that way. So this crazy idea that I, discussed with Tim, it just really worked, and it was the right thing. And to your point, I think that a big portion of it, hunting, is the camaraderie that you have, and to your point, grandfathers, fathers, not as much today as it used to be, but the camaraderie, I mean, I've been on some pretty shitty hunts before, but if I was with some good guys, it was not so bad.
Yeah, it's, it's funny because that issue, like you just talked about with ski shops, that's something we try to educate retailers about. I mean, and look, you have, I'm sure, and I have been into small, gun shops that are dark and, not friendly and warm and welcoming. And so somebody who's never gone shooting before, never owned a gun before, they're intimidated, and it's so important. And the dealers that are successful, I mean, it's well lit, it's clean, it's organized, they're welcoming, they're friendly, they're inviting, they provide good customer service. I mean, that is such a key. And then you've got some dealers are unfortunately a little bit more like hobbyists than they are really retailers, and so their shops are just not as successful because they just want to stand around and talk to their friends, drinking coffee, complaining about whatever.
Well, yeah, exactly. But those are the people that are really started it. They had a passion for hunting. They decided they start a shop primarily so that they could continue hunting. As long as it pays for their bills to go hunting, they're perfectly content. But and you see that in all kinds of industries. But I'm really excited, honestly, to see the number of new people that have taken it up, because I think it's. Well, I love hunting. And have for most of my life. Although I did take a fairly long sabbatical while I was trying to be a business guy, I suppose, and had young children and things like that. But I think it's just the greatest thing there is to enjoy the outdoors and to be with friends that I enjoy as well.
And there's so many different types of hunting. Upland, which I really enjoy. Working over the dogs, walking the field with friends. Duck hunting. Big game hunting. There's so many different types of hunting that there's a little something for everybody.
Yeah, I for the first time was quail hunting about 2 weeks ago. Georgia State was kind enough. They had their 33rd annual quail hunt, and they invite businesses primarily from Georgia, but a few others, to come and enjoy it. So, but there was only 18 people invited near Albany, Georgia, all the plantations. And so I had the pleasure of hunting in the morning, one morning with the Commissioner for the Economic Development Group in Georgia, and then in the afternoon with Brian Kemp.
Yes, Governor Kemp.
Which was we had a great time. It was really nice to see the governor out there being one of the guys and doing normal guy things, and
he's not a pretend hunter. He actually hunts quail. It's
So and I didn't embarrass myself. The second walk around, I had 10 straight. So
there you go.
I'm told that's pretty damn good. And I told him, look, as the CEO of Remington Firearms, you don't want to be a shitty shot.
That's right.
It's not something you want to do.
That's true.
So talking about Georgia a little bit, there's been a huge shift in the firearms companies that primarily came from from Connecticut, New York, really the Northeast, and now they're all have moved or are moving.
So Georgia has done an exceptionally good job at recruiting companies to come to the state. Their economic development team is really fantastic. They have a big presence at our SHOT Show. Yep. They sponsor a lot of NSSF events and programs. Governor, we have as it turns out, our board is meeting. Their annual meeting in March is in Georgia, and Governor Kemp and the economic development people will be there as well. And so, your announcement was fantastic. Taurus recently. So they've really done a fantastic job of recruiting companies to come to the state, which is, and we see that now other states following that or doing their own efforts. Tennessee has been very successful. The announcement that Smith & Wesson is moving there, Beretta already moved there. South Dakota has been pretty successful. They've recruited a number of companies out to South Dakota, and Wyoming's been very successful. They got Magpul, they got Weatherby, they got Stag Arms left Waterbury, Connecticut, and moved the company to Sheridan, Wyoming. So there's a lot of competition. As we had 8 or 9 governors at the SHOT Show. We had a forum with the governors, and part of that was talking about recruiting companies, and that's why they were there. They're there to recruit companies to move to their state. There's some fierce competition.
Democratic governors?
There weren't any, surprisingly.
Oh, well, what a shock that is.
Not that we would say no, and in fact,
no, of course not.
We invited Governor Sisolak, the governor of Nevada, and we didn't get an answer to the invitation. Not surprising, but it's unfortunate, but we didn't have anyone who wanted to come. So
well, it's interesting because I don't want to get off onto a political discussion or rampage, but it seems that a lot of people have forgotten that they're really supposed to be for all the people, not just some of the people. Which is, I honestly have. Maybe I'm naive a little bit, but I have not seen a Democrat or a Republican politician or governor that is not willing to listen to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they're going to agree with it or do anything, but they certainly listen. I haven't really seen the other work from the other way, but anyway, that's a whole different thing. One of the things, of course, that our move to Georgia, et cetera, how because you read the announcement.
Yeah.
And, just actually jump back a little bit. One of the interesting things I found with Georgia is they're not just supportive of the kind of the firearms industry, they're supportive of companies within Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I called Pat Wilson not that long ago, who I'm
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
and said, "Look, Pat, I've got a problem with a couple of supply chain issues. Could you help me out?" Within an hour, I had a couple of names from other companies, really big companies in Georgia. And within 2 hours, I had phone calls from their executive vice president and
Wow.
people saying, "Yeah, I want to help you out." They really are supportive of other companies within Georgia. And even the firearms companies are supportive of each
Yeah,
other.
that's
I
fantastic.
shot with Josh. I can't
Dor-
remember Josh's
Josh
last
Dorsey.
name. Josh Dorsey. I had a
Yeah.
great time with him at the quail hunt. Got to know him a little bit, and he said, "Look, Ken, here's a few names of people that might be able to help you." So,
Wow,
it's
that's
really nice
fantastic.
to be
Yeah.
in a state. Could you imagine me calling an economic development person in the state of New York and asking them for their help?
I, I think you'd still be waiting for the phone call to be returned.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
look, since we're talking a little bit about not just New York but various ones, I think there's a real a different I think there's a real difference in the perception and reality that people have towards firearms. When I say that, I'm talking about the various acts that have been done. The Protection of Lawful Commerce Act is one of them. So a lot of people think that, oh, you can't sue a firearms company, which we all know is bullshit.
Absolutely wrong. Yes.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what,
Sure.
because I read it all the time, and
Yeah.
it's just, which is nonsense. So
The Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which I'm intimately familiar with because I helped to write it, and I spent a lot of time going to Washington explaining to people on both sides of the aisle why it was necessary. And it did pass with broad bipartisan support. It wasn't just a Republican bill. There was a lot of Democrats who voted for it as well. People like Blanche Lincoln from Arkansas and Mary Landrieu from Senator Landrieu from Louisiana, as I recall. And so why did this law come to be? And the reason is because of a series of lawsuits against the industry. We had seen lawsuits against the industry going back to like the 70s and then in the 80s with various, kind of far out there legal theories that weren't successful. And then in the mid 90s, we started seeing these lawsuits against not just an individual company, but against the entire industry, starting with a case called Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York, in front of a very liberal activist judge named Jack Weinstein. And that then followed with gun control politicians like Ed Rendell and Elliot Spitzer, the former disgraced attorney general and governor.
just maybe a little disgraced.
Yeah. Well, at least he kept his socks on. That's all I could say for him. So, and at the time, Andrew Cuomo, the now disgraced governor of New York, I see a pattern developing there.
Yeah, really.
He was the Secretary of HUD under Clinton. Anyway, they and the gun control community at the time, it was really just the Brady Center, as we affectionately refer to them as the Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
Got together with these anti-gun politicians, chiefly through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and plaintiffs' lawyers that had been involved in the tobacco litigation in the 90s, but bet wrong, didn't participate in the settlement with the state AGs where the big payday was for the plaintiffs' lawyers. So those guys were looking for an easy mark, they thought, that they could roll and get a payday. And so you had this unholy alliance of gun control politicians, chiefly mayors, gun control groups, and plaintiffs' lawyers looking for a payday. And that's when we started seeing these lawsuits by major cities, all of them, with one exception, Democrats, not to get political, but that's just the fact, suing the entire industry, all the handgun manufacturers primarily, and alleging that somehow the lawful sale of firearms had caused a public nuisance, but trying to blame the criminal misuse of legal, lawfully sold non-defective firearms, the cost of ambulance, police services, and all these things. They were seeking, in each case, billions and billions of dollars, would have completely bankrupted the industry. So the answer to stopping this literally tidal wave of dangerous lawsuits that could literally shutter the industry, and with it the Second Amendment, which was the goal, either bankrupt the industry or get them to capitulate to settlements, and then we'll impose gun control through court settlements that we could never get passed through Congress. And so the answer to stopping this became legislation. And that gave rise to the Protecting the Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which really simply codifies bedrock principles of American jurisprudence of tort law, that a manufacturer or a seller of a non-defective product that is sold lawfully is not responsible for the subsequent misuse of that product by a criminal over whom the manufacturer or the dealer has absolutely no control. You can't blame them. It sounds cliche, but like imagine suing Ford for drunk driving accidents. Nobody would say, oh, that makes sense. Of course it makes no sense. It's un-American, it's wrong, it's unfair. And that's all the law does. And it is not, contrary to what Joe Biden either believes or is willing to lie about, it is not blanket immunity. There are many exceptions that allow traditional, normal lawsuits to go forward. Breach of warranty, if the product is defective, negligent entrustment, or if you sell the gun in violation of the law. So you're a dealer and you don't have the person fill out a 4473 and you don't do a background check, or the person is prohibited and you sell a gun to him anyway.
Unless he's Hunter Biden, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Because that's okay that he has one, right?
Right, exactly. And then his the girlfriend or the wife or whatever throws it in the trash
Right.
in the dumpster, and that's anyway, that's a whole different discussion. So it's simply not blanket immunity, and it's ironic to me that the president, and he repeats this lie, and it is a lie, because it's one thing if you say it and you're mistaken. And he has said it, and he's been fact-checked by the Washington Post, Politico, AP, and others, and they have said that's not correct. It's not blanket immunity. And then he repeats it. Well, if you repeat it knowing it's not true, that's called a lie, where I come from. So, unfortunately,
Right.
The president is willing to lie. It's not true. And just today, there were, again, Washington Post, the AP put out, fact-checked the State of the Union address and said that, that's just false. It's wrong. And so, there's just no, it's harsh perhaps to say the president's a liar, but I don't know how else you describe it. So, so this law is very important. And, it's really also, I don't know whether it's humorous or ironic, but you have the president just about a week or so ago touting the settlement by the insurance carriers in the Newtown case. Well, putting lie to his own theory that, people in the industry can't be sued. Now, that lawsuit, in our opinion, should never have been allowed to proceed, should have been dismissed based on the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. It is exactly the kind of case that the law is designed to stop. But the Connecticut Supreme Court allowed the case to go forward, and as you know very well, the defendant in the case, Remington Outdoor Company, no longer exists, and it was the decision of the insurance carriers for their own, in my opinion, their own financial reasons, settle the case.
I'm honestly, I'm not sure, Larry, there was any financial reasons for that. I think that was a political statement that they made.
Could be.
And
Could
I
be.
think it's got nothing to do with financial reasons.
Well, the theory I've heard, and I think has perhaps some merit, is fear of fear of a bad faith claim. But I think I suspect that if you were allowed to peek inside of the emails and be a fly on the wall at the meetings of these insurance companies and the lawyers, I think you're probably correct. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least to find out I have no information on this. This is pure speculation, but it would not surprise me in the least to find out people in the White House were calling those insurance companies.
Yeah, well, as you know, I was preparing
Yeah.
for that case.
Yep.
I'm pretty intimately aware of it. And since we've jumped to there, well, just because that was certainly one of the things we would get to. So I know that case
Oh, I know you do.
like the back of my hand. And
Yeah.
and even the presiding judge, when when it was first taken, came out and said it would be a Herculean effort
Right.
for plaintiff to prove that Mr. Lanza killed his mother, took the gun, and killed these so many people, all because of marketing.
Right.
And
Yep.
so as we were preparing prior to the bankruptcy of the Chapter 11, there was just no way in the world that we were contemplating any form of settlement. As a matter of fact, I think we both know the attorneys really well that
Yes.
represented us.
Yes.
And any conversations, when I first got to know them, I told them up front, I said, we're going to make a safe product, and I am never, this was before Remington,
Yeah.
this was my prior life, and I said, and I am never going to settle, and
Right.
we're going to go to court every single solitary time.
Right.
And they were pretty happy about that for the first 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden the cases stopped coming because, the counsel's pretty smart. They look and say, well, what are the chances of us winning this? And
Yeah.
when they saw that you would fight it every step of the way, eventually there was no cases left. And the same thing with Remington. I would have fought that case tooth and nail because in my humble experience, and I'm not a counsel or attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but there was just, in my opinion, there was no way in the world they would have won that case.
I would not disagree. I think it is important. Look, it's one thing if, something goes wrong in the manufacturing process and you discover that in discovery, that's a different story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if in this case, the theory was like really just so far out there. And, the Connecticut Supreme Court, as you know, because you were intimately involved,
Yeah.
the Connecticut Supreme Court essentially rewrote the state consumer protection statute and turned it into something it was never intended to be and doesn't say, in black and white, and allowed, these personal injury claims when there was no what's called in the law privity of contract between Remington and the plaintiffs in the case. And it was never envisioned that this consumer protection statute is for when the guy says, I'm going to paint your house, and then he doesn't paint your house kind of thing. Right. Or he tells you it's going to cost you, $500, and then he tries to charge you, $5,000. That's what that statute's about. It's not about, allowing personal injury claims or wrongful death claims. But that they just tried to find a way to avoid having to dismiss the case. I think, unfortunately, that 4-3 decision was politically motivated. It was originally dismissed by the trial court judge, and even when, as you said, when the Connecticut Supreme Court allowed the case to go forward, they acknowledged that this is, they have to prove that it was Remington's marketing that somehow caused him to pick that gun, which is, of course, they said, a Herculean proof problem. And at the end of the day, there was no evidence. I mean, if there was any advertising that the plaintiffs found objectionable, it would have been on 60 Minutes, and it wasn't because it didn't exist. And they
Right.
would never be able to prove anybody saw any advertising, let alone that it had any influence. And this idea that this notion that Remington or anybody in the industry advertises to deranged individuals, which is what the allegation was that the court allowed it to go forward on, is just absurd on its face. So I do believe the case would have been won. Should have been dismissed on summary judgment,
Yes.
or at trial, or a post-trial motion, or the many levels of appellate review after that. I believe firmly that Remington would have won that case. The carriers would have won that case. So there are other reasons motivating why they settled, and the insurance companies, I'm sure, were never going to fess up to whatever their motivation was. I've heard the bad faith claim. I think there were political motivations. One of those four carriers, Liberty, will not write insurance policies for any lines, any kind of coverage for anybody in the industry, period, paragraph. And that is a Liberty, Schmiberty, mutual board level decision.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised by the settlement, although very, very disappointed in it. The unfortunate thing in our industry is when something happens, it's generally catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a small little thing.
Right.
It's a big thing. And there's enough fingers to be pointed at enough people, and everybody always does it. I mean, we've had so many cases at Remington before the bankruptcy that I looked into that, in one instance, a young man committed suicide. The coroner said he committed suicide. The state trooper on the scene said he committed suicide. The muzzle was right at his forehead. I mean,
Right.
everything there is, but they sued Remington for a faulty trigger.
Yeah.
I mean, and I understand it. I honestly, I have to say, Larry, as a parent, I'm not sure if my child committed suicide or if I accidentally shot them, that I'd be willing to stand up and say, well, I screwed up. It was my fault.
Yeah.
Who knows how we would behave?
Yep.
But
It's terrible.
so that's the unfortunate thing, is they truly are catastrophic. But
Yeah.
I think that it's really important, and NSSF did a great job telling as many people as are willing to look that this was not an agreement or a settlement from any of the firearms companies.
Right.
Rem Arms did not do it. Remington Firearms didn't do it. Remington Ammunition didn't do it.
Right.
This was the insurance companies that made the decision, and they were acting on behalf, I guess, of themselves, but for the estate of Remington Outdoor Company, which was no longer the firearms companies or the
Right.
ammunition company.
Right. Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for that. We tried to set the record straight, if you will, and make people understand. And frankly, I was surprised that our statement got as much pickup and coverage in mainstream media that it did. And it was interesting listening to the press conference of the lead plaintiff's lawyer. And he said, he admitted that the purpose of the lawsuit was not to recover damages like a normal lawsuit. The purpose was to send a message to the banks, to send a message to the insurance companies not to do business with the industry, and try to, somehow force the industry to change something. I don't know, because nobody does what they're alleging or were alleging. Advertising to deranged individuals. I mean, I was like, how would you even find them? I mean, even if there was, like, hypothetically someone was willing to do that, I don't know how you would do that. I mean, it's like, you advertise to consumers who can purchase the product. You're not responsible for the deranged mind of a lunatic or a person that with mental illness that was allowed to go untreated for all those years.
Well, but I think that carries it to the next step a little bit, is that, again, we look at the protection of lawful arms, Commerce and Arms Act, and kind of what that has done and what it was set out to do, and I think is accomplished. But we are liable for things that we've done wrong.
Right.
But then let's flip to the good old Cuomos Bill. I think it's S 7196.
Yep.
I think that's what it was. And because one of the things that people don't understand, after that bill was passed, I had somebody from the media call and I said, "You guys just really don't understand. We cannot, Remington Firearms or Ruger or SIG, any of these companies, we cannot go out and sell guns without the proper, we can only ship them to another FFL.
Right.
The FFL can only transfer them to somebody that has passed a NICS check.
Right.
Now, is there some small little gun companies, not manufacturers, maybe there is, I don't know, but little retailers that don't do that? Maybe there is, I'm sure, but the major manufacturers, in no way in the world are they ever going to consider doing anything like that. So that bullshit act that was passed at 7196, because it was to protect the citizens of New York City from what I have no frickin' idea.
Well, so as you know, we Nssf and 14 other members of the industry have sued the state and the Attorney General, Ms. James, just challenging this law. It's an attempt to circumvent the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It's basically an attempt to, as all these lawsuits have been, going back to the city lawsuits, an attempt to regulate the industry. Either you go bankrupt defending these cases, which is just fine with them because they would rather there not be any firearms, or you're going to have to settle the case and agree to terms and conditions that'll be memorialized in a court order, and we will regulate through the court order how it is you engage in your business practices. And that's ultimately the problem. New York could not pass a statute that says dealers in, let's say, Texas, because one of the dealer plaintiffs is from Texas. Dealers in Texas, you must do the following. You must have, let's say, you must do an inventory once a week. You must fingerprint and photograph your purchasers, the buyers, and keep that record indefinitely. You must conduct, straw purchase awareness training program for your employees. You can only sell guns, after, you can't sell them after 3 business days, even though that's allowed by federal law. They could not, and then try to enforce that against a retailer in Texas, right? But that's exactly what they're doing. Instead of it being just the legislature says you must do X, if you don't do these things, you're guilty of contributing to a public nuisance. And so the same dealer in Texas, if he doesn't do these things, is subject to being sued and hauled into a courtroom in New York because the state or the city or any county or village or any individual or even interest groups, like, for example, the NAACP that sued the industry back in the 1990s, can bring a lawsuit against you and for public nuisance and get damages as well as injunctive relief, so that a court in New York could say, okay, this is how you have to conduct your business, right? So we believe that the law, one, is preempted by the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act because it's a transparent effort to avoid that. So the Supremacy Clause, federal law controls. So we think it violates the Supremacy Clause. Second, we think it violates what's known in the law as the Dormant Commerce Clause. The state's ability to regulate economic activity or commerce stops at its border. As I said, it couldn't pass a statute directly saying dealers in Texas must do the following, right? But and they can't do it through lawsuits. They can't use the state's power to regulate commerce that's taking place wholly outside of the state. And in the case, for example, of selling a handgun, it has to be entirely outside of New York because a dealer in Texas couldn't sell a handgun to somebody from New York.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
So,
and the dealers in Texas are fairly smart. They know that.
Yeah, I mean, right.
Oh, just a second here. What your address is? What
exactly?
Your license, your driver's license is New York. I'm sorry.
So, so that's, we think it violates the, violates the Dormant Commerce Clause. Really violates the sovereignty of other states. to decide for themselves what the law is in the state with respect to how firearms are sold, or Congress.
But New York can make New York rules. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and then the statute itself, as you know, from having read it when we talked about it at the time, is so vague it doesn't even clearly tell you what it is you're supposed to do to avoid liability. You have to have reasonable controls, including but not limited to. So you can do even the included things to the extent you can figure out what those are. But that may not be enough, Ken.
Exactly. It's a bizarre, stupid thing. I remember at the time talking to the media after it was passed, and they, and we were discussing exactly what you and I did earlier. Is that, somebody buys a car and they crash their car, and well, gee whiz, this happened, or whatever it is. But I said, I've got a real simple solution for Governor Cuomo. How about you change the bonds for getting out of jail?
Right.
How about spending more money and bringing more police in? It's easy to resolve the problems that these violent states have. Let's talk about Texas a little bit, because I live in Texas. Texas, I think there's probably more guns per capita in Texas than in most other states combined. Yet there's hardly any violence here.
Yeah, exactly.
Why is that? If there's so many guns, why isn't there a lot more violence?
We hear that all the time, right? That more guns causes crime, when in fact the exact opposite is the truth. So it has to do with it's a multitude of factors, but among them, and probably one, if not the most important, one of the most important, is enforce the laws that we have on the books. And the public consistently, when they're asked this question in polls, they don't really think we need more gun control laws. We need to enforce the laws we have on the books. There are, as you know, so many laws, you can't even count them. I mean, there used to be this cliche that there are 20,000, gun laws on the books. Well, that cliche goes back literally 50, 60 years. So it's way more than 20,000, because the legislatures just keep passing yet more gun laws on top of more gun laws, to the point where you can't even figure anything out, particularly in a place like California. And so you have to enforce the laws. And there are, look, you send people to prison. You don't let them out. You don't let people out without establishing bail. You don't let people out on parole. You have lengthy prison sentences, and you mean it. And then you have other factors like, economic opportunities, so that people are working and they're not hanging out, getting into mischief. There are a lot of factors, but blaming, law-abiding citizens or the industry for selling to those law-abiding citizens, firearms, exercising a constitutional right is not going to ever solve the problem of crime.
We are not the problem.
No, absolutely not.
The law-abiding person that goes to the gun store and buys a gun and goes to the NICS check and all that, they are not the problems. Yeah, every once in a while you might find somebody that kind of goes off the deep end one day and does something stupid, but you're never going to prevent that.
Correct.
But it's just so frickin' maddening. It's unbelievable, because the things that them passing that 7196 is not going to do one single solitary thing to improve or prevent crime in New York. Nothing.
Absolutely not. I mean, if everyone did everything they wanted, it would not stop crime. You know what would? Going back to the policies of, started under the Giuliani administration, where they what was called the broken glass theory, right? Don't let petty crimes go unpunished. Turnstile jumping, arrest them. And guess what?
Right.
You find out that these are people that have warrants for other crimes. Enforce the laws. And also, I mean, it stopped because of lawsuits, but the whole idea of stop, question, and frisk was probably the single biggest driver in reducing violent crime in New York than anything else. and there was these lawsuits saying it was racist, et cetera. I don't want to get into that debate, but I will tell you who benefited the most from that policy were communities, disadvantaged communities, minorities, who are the victim of crime. Look, the person walking around Scarsdale, New York, or the Upper East Side of New York, or Park Avenue is not likely to be the victim of a crime.
Exactly.
But the person living in Bed-Stuy or in Brownsville or in the South Bronx, they're the ones who benefited from those tough on crime policies. And that's what we need to get back to. It's really, honestly, it's always struck me as being not that complicated.
Look, I don't think it is that complicated, really. I think it's simply a matter of saying, if you do this, this is what we're going to do. If any parent or any dog owner will always tell you that, or even Biden, although he hasn't quite figured this one out, if you make a threat, you have to follow through on your threat.
Right. Or then it's
because
just
if
hollow.
you don't, they just push the envelope more and more and more and more and more.
Right.
So, to me, it's just ludicrous. I would hate to see, when I first went to New York, I don't even remember what year it was, but it wasn't safe to go into Central Park in the evening, and I remember talking to a cop, and it was a female cop, and she said, no, you don't want to go there. And then she said, well, why not? Let's walk there together. So this female cop and I walked into Central Park, and it was early evening, and she's just pointing out all the shit that was going on. Well, I don't know what Central Park is like today, but I know 2 years ago you could walk through Central Park any time of the day or night with no problems.
But not back in the 70s and 80s. You wouldn't
Absolutely
dare.
not.
You wouldn't dare.
But I'm wondering if Central Park has changed even now.
I suspect that it has.
I suspect it has too.
Yeah.
So what about the other one? What about Mexico sues the U.S. gun makers?
Yes, apparently, the Mexican government's hug-a-thug approach to the cartels and failure to enforce their own laws and to bring these cartel members to justice in Mexican courtrooms have decided that it's the industry that's responsible, that we've created a public nuisance in Mexico by selling guns in the United States legally to, as you said before, only selling them to U.S. citizens who have passed a background check administered by the federal government, somehow responsible for the illegal export under U.S. law and the illegal import into Mexico and violating Mexican law by the drug cartels, and then being misused. I mean, it's just, it is the same tired, hackneyed legal theories that, we dealt with in the 90s when the city lawsuits and what gave rise to the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. And of course, who's representing the government of Mexico but the Brady Center, the same group that was involved in, the lawsuits against the industry by the cities that we talked about earlier. And
Great.
So the defendants in the case have filed a motion to dismiss the case in federal court in Boston. Why they sued in Boston, I don't know. Well, I have theories about that, but and in any event, so that's being litigated. I'm cautiously optimistic that the judge will, I think as he must, dismiss the case based on the fact that in the first instance, before you even get to the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, the Mexican government has no standing to bring a lawsuit in the United States complaining about what's going on in Mexico. And of course, the answer is what? So why aren't they suing in Mexico? Well, because they could assert jurisdiction over the U.S. companies in Mexico because you can't sell guns into Mexico unless the Mexican government approves the sale.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, so I think they don't have standing in the first instance. And even if they get past that hurdle, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act is very clear. It's exactly the kind of lawsuit that was designed to stop I'm sure the case will quickly end up in the First Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, and who knows, may end up at the Supreme Court. But I think the case will, I'm hopeful the case will be dismissed as it should. I mean, it's really not unlike the situation we just talked about with like New York trying to tell dealers in Texas how they have to operate their business. This is the government of Mexico coming into a U.S. courtroom, essentially trying to say, well, we want $10 billion and we want injunctive relief because we don't like how you sell guns in the United States because we think that's responsible for criminals taking the guns into Mexico. Not the the rampant systemic corruption in Mexico, where every time you turn around, some general or politician is being charged with having been in cahoots with the cartels, and you see stories like in The Guardian a little while back about how the Mexican army just stands between two warring cartels and does nothing.
Right.
And then the average Mexican farmers start acquiring firearms to protect themselves because the government isn't protecting them. So, it's just the same, it's Mexico trying to like tell companies in the United States how they should operate their business. Well, that's, thank you very much, but we have our own Congress and we have our own state legislatures and we have this thing called the Second Amendment, which people don't know this. There is actually in the Mexican Constitution a right to keep and bear arms.
Is there?
Yes, but of course they don't interpret it as actually saying that. They don't have a right to. Yeah. So, you have to get government permission and all you can have is like a 22 or a 38 revolver and maybe like a shotgun for hunting, but that's about it, right? So, and the cartels run the place. I mean, it's terrible. I feel bad for the average Mexican citizen, but this lawsuit is just it's politically motivated. And again, I don't have any evidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if the truth is that the Mexican government had been talking to the Biden administration and the Biden administration encourage them to bring the lawsuit.
Well, isn't it? Look, I have a theory that I don't think I'm too far off base, and it's just about always follow the money.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm usually wrong either,
no,
because if you dig deep enough, you're going to find money going someplace.
Follow the money. Yes, exactly.
So I guess at the end of the day, Larry, we can't expect this to change very quickly, can we?
No, this industry is not for the faint of heart. We are on the.
I love it. I think it's a great industry to be involved in.
Yeah, it's never a dull moment. I'll tell you that. But we are on the front lines of a culture war.
Yes.
With two competing views of the world. Our side believes in freedom and personal responsibility, and the other side are statists. They believe in socialism. They believe in government control over of your life, and I think they have a fundamentally wrong view of human nature, and this view that the government can solve all problems, and the government. There's very few problems the government can actually solve, right? Like you just pave the roads and keep the peace and protect the borders. So that's a whole other discussion, right? So
yeah, of course, history will tell them much, much different. If they bother to learn a little bit about history, it will tell them that the governments can't solve anything. Right. It will also tell them socialism doesn't work. And, but of course, there's those people that think, yeah, but it didn't work for you guys, but it'll work for us. Yeah. I have a really good friends and our new distributors in the Ukraine, but really good friends or they've become very good friends that live in Kherson. Mm-hmm. And she sent me a text the other day that it was really pretty prolific because she said, you can see from what we're doing in the Ukraine, we believe in family, yes, freedom, and country. And she said, it seems that most countries don't feel the these days. And I thought, boy, that's pretty good statement, and I think pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great irony, right? We hear Biden talking about calling for a ban on, so-called assault weapons, while these people were just, days ago applauding the Ukrainians for, providing automatic weapons, actual weapons of war to their citizens in order to defend themselves against, the Russians. So it's,
well, what's the old saying? Do what I say. Do what I say, not what I do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Look,
the logical consistency is just.
Yeah, exactly.
Shocking.
I mean, we could go on and we could get off on all kinds of things, but I'm going to bring us to a halt now. I think this has been really, really good, Larry. First of all, I appreciate you taking the time, and I've certainly enjoyed the conversation. I think that a lot of people that have only kind of a fleeting idea of the things that go on would be just astounded, because I've talked to people when this stupid bill was passed in New York, 7196, that I told people we're probably the most regulated industry within the United States. And there's not a hell of a lot we can do to break the law. We follow the law to a T. So, anything that goes on after that is not something that we can really prevent.
Yeah.
I can't prevent somebody from buying a gun legally and getting beat over the head and somebody stealing that gun and using it for whatever.
Right.
But
as you know, there are so many things the industry does that doesn't have to do. Things like don't lie for the other guy to try to help prevent illegal straw purchases. And it's an illegal purchase. It's not an illegal sale unless the dealer knows. In which case they're complicit in a crime. And oh, by the way, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act would afford them no protection. We do things like Project Child Safe. We've been doing that for over 20 years. We've distributed something like 41 million firearm safety education kits in every state in the country, working with every law enforcement agency. We don't have to do that, but we do that. Members of the industry for decades now have been putting, as I like to call it, a lock in the box, and providing locks at retail. I mean, that was one of the silly things from the Biden administration the other day. They were bragging about how they put out this regulation that would require retailers to make locks available at the point of purchase. Well, that's been the law.
Every box has got a lock in it.
And it's been the law for 20 plus years that retailers have to have locks available, and they have to certify that when they get their license and when they renew their license. So that was just all BS for public consumption to make it look like they were doing something when they were actually doing nothing. Right. We have a new program now called Operation Secure Store where we're working with ATF to raise awareness with retailers about smash and grab burglaries, which ATF came to us a number of years ago and said, look, we've spotted this really troubling trend with a big increase in smash and grabs. This is gang activity chiefly, and they hit in these stores and they're grabbing a lot of guns at one time. So we work with them, developed Operation Secure Store, educating retailers about how to make themselves less susceptible to a burglary, to report it. And for years, we've been doing matching rewards. Whenever ATF in a smash and grab burglary of a dealer puts out a reward, we match it.
Right.
Do you think we get any credit from that with the Biden administration? Oh no, we're the enemy, right? We're working on suicide prevention. We work with the VA. We don't have to do that. Do we get any credit? Absolutely not. Fixed NICS.
No.
The Fixed NICS Act that was passed and signed by President Trump, that was named after the Fixed NICS program we launched after Sandy Hook, where Nssf has changed the law in 16 states to make sure that disqualifying chiefly mental health records go into the background check system so that somebody who's a prohibited person under existing current law. We're not looking to try to expand that. Is in the system. I mean, we saw, for example, because what we see, often, too often, is the common denominator in many of these high-profile tragedies is the mental health or lack of mental health of the shooter, whether it's Adam Lanza in Sandy Hook, or whether it's in Aurora, or Virginia Tech, or Parkland. That to us we see as the common denominator. So we launched that program. We've changed the law in 16 states, increased the records that have gone into the NICS system in that category by like over 270%. Senator Cornyn sponsored the bill after Sutherland Springs, where the guy passed a background check when he never should have, because the DOD didn't put the records in. Named it after our program passed, get signed into law. We didn't get an ounce of credit for what we had done. But, we still do it because it's the right thing to do. And we're good corporate citizens.
Yeah, no, and the other thing is, I think that the reality is, and we both know a lot of people in the firearms industry, we, obviously,
Yeah.
And even our competitors, I'm talking my competitors,
Yeah.
but, everybody is a good, all the people I know are good
Yep.
corporate citizens as well, responsible. Yeah. We know what to do, and we're very cognizant of what's right and wrong.
Yep, absolutely.
It's crazy, some of the stuff that you hear, but I guess it's not going to change at some point in time. But I think that the winds are in our favor a little bit because of the tremendous number of first-time firearms owners that over the last couple of years.
I would agree. Support for gun control is waning. We have all these new, as we talked about earlier, all these new first-time gun buyers. And what is really interesting, and I think a game changer, is that the changing demographics of who's buying firearms. These are, not all Republicans. A large percentage probably are Democrats or lean that way, but they took their personal security into their own hands and purchased firearms for self-protection, and now they realize the importance of the Second Amendment. And I think that's going to change the dynamics, within those communities at some level. They don't all have to become Second Amendment advocates, but I think it will impact how they view these laws that are proposed. And I think they're starting to see through the hollow rhetoric of all these gun control politicians.
I agree. I totally agree, Larry. I think that things are changing a little bit. I hope they'll continue. But we shall see.
We will.
We'll probably have a very similar conversation at this time next year.
Yeah. Well, happy to come on anytime you want. We'd like.
Larry, this was great. I'm really glad that you could take the time to talk to me, and I think it was very beneficial for those listening.
Well, I hope so, and I enjoyed our conversation as always. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Larry. It's good catching up with you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. See you.